$10. That's all it took for him to destroy everything I'd built over 5 years. The cost of a few cheap coffees became the excuse to strip away my career, my reputation, and my faith in corporate justice. But he didn't know that his cold, calculated decision would become the key to my revenge. He didn't know that the woman he discarded like trash would use that same $10 lie to bring down his $80 million empire. This is how I turned his greed into his grave. My name is Emily Carter. And until 6 months ago, I believed hard work and loyalty meant something in corporate America. At 32, I'd clawed my way up from waiting tables to pay for community college to becoming a senior project manager at BrightPath Solutions, one of Denver's most prestigious tech firms. No trust fund, no connections, just pure grit and countless nights studying while my wealthy colleagues partied their way through Ivy League schools. The BrightPath building stood like a glass monument to innovation in downtown Denver, its 40 floors reflecting the Rocky Mountains in the distance. Every morning, I'd walk through those revolving doors with pride, my heels clicking against Italian marble that cost more per square foot than my childhood home. The lobby smelled of expensive coffee and ambition, where young professionals in tailored suits discussed million-dollar deals over organic smoothies. My office on the 23rd floor wasn't corner material, but it had a view of the city that reminded me daily of how far I'd come. The walls held my certifications, each one earned through sacrifice, skipped meals, secondhand clothes, and a social life that existed mainly in my imagination. While others networked at country clubs, I networked through results. My projects consistently came in under budget and ahead of schedule. I thought that mattered. Richard Hale ruled this kingdom from the top floor. At 55, he embodied everything corporate America worshipped: Harvard MBA, generational wealth, and a smile that never reached his cold gray eyes. He'd inherited BrightPath from his father, but transformed it from a modest software company into an $80 million giant through what the business magazines called aggressive innovation. Those of us on the inside knew it was more about aggressive corner cutting, but nobody dared speak up. Not when Richard controlled not just our paychecks, but our entire careers through his vast network of influence. I'd caught his attention 3 years ago when I saved a failing government contract worth $12 million. He'd called me scrappy and refreshingly authentic, code words, I later learned, for useful but ultimately disposable. He promoted me twice, each time with a public display of mentorship that made me feel chosen, special even. I should have recognized the pattern. Richard collected protégés like trophies, displaying them prominently until they outlived their usefulness, or, worse, learned too much. The culture at BrightPath was what we called professionally brutal. Mistakes weren't learning opportunities. They were death sentences. Competition wasn't just encouraged, it was weaponized. I watched colleagues sabotage each other over parking spaces, let alone promotions. But I thought I was different. I thought my work ethic and results created a shield around me. I thought Richard's public praise meant protection. How naive I was. The first sign of trouble came when I was assigned to lead the Morrison defense contract, a $30 million project that would secure BrightPath's position as a major government contractor. Richard personally handed me the files, his manicured fingers drumming against the mahogany conference table as he spoke about trust and discretion. "This project requires someone with unquestionable integrity," he'd said, those gray eyes boring into mine. "Someone who understands that success sometimes requires flexibility." I should have run then. Instead, I felt honored. The Morrison defense contract unraveled everything. 3 weeks into the project, I discovered discrepancies in the billing codes, systematic overcharges hidden beneath layers of technical jargon and creative accounting. We were billing the Department of Defense for phantom consultants, inflating equipment costs by 300%, and charging premium rates for junior developers. The fraud totaled over $8 million. I brought my findings to Richard on a Tuesday morning, my hands trembling as I laid out the evidence in his pristine corner office. He listened without interrupting, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, those gray eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, he smiled, that cold, calculating smile that made my stomach turn. "Emily," he said, voice smooth as aged whiskey. You're seeing problems where there are only solutions. Government contracts are complex. These aren't discrepancies, they're industry standard adjustments. I pushed back. I had to. Richard, this is fraud. If the DoD audits, they won't, he interrupted, unless someone gives them a reason to look closer. The threat hung between us like a blade. I left his office knowing I had two choices: become complicit or become a target. I chose neither. I quietly documented everything and continued working, hoping to find a way to report it without destroying my career. My mistake was underestimating Richard's paranoia. 2 days later, on Thursday, October 12th, I was called into HR at 4:47 p.m. The timing was deliberate, late enough that most employees had left, minimizing witnesses to my humiliation. Richard sat at the conference table with Janet from HR and Martin from accounting, their faces arranged in practiced concern. "Emily," Janet began, sliding a paper across the table. "We've discovered a discrepancy in your expense report from last month." I looked at the highlighted line, a lunch receipt from Chipotle, dated September 15th. The amount, 19.87. But the receipt I'd submitted showed 9.87, a $10 difference. "This has to be a scanning error," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I can pull up my credit card statement." "We already did," Martin interrupted, producing a bank record. Someone had altered my submitted receipt, adding a 1 in front of the 9. It was a pathetic, obvious forgery. But it didn't matter. This wasn't about $10. Richard leaned forward, his expression a masterpiece of disappointed concern. "Emily, trust is everything in this business. If we can't trust you with $10, how can we trust you with $30 million contracts?" The absurdity of it made me want to laugh, or scream. Here was a man orchestrating millions in fraud, firing me over $10 that he'd probably fabricated himself. But I saw the trap clearly now. If I mentioned the Morrison contract, I'd sound like a disgruntled employee making wild accusations. If I stayed silent, I'd accept the false guilt. "This is about Morrison, isn't it?" I said quietly. Richard's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something predatory beneath. "This is about integrity, Emily. Something you clearly lack. Security will escort you out. You have 10 minutes to collect your belongings. 10 minutes to pack 5 years. Security guard Tom, who I'd shared coffee with every morning, couldn't meet my eyes as he watched me dump family photos and certificates into a cardboard box. My colleagues averted their gazes, suddenly fascinated by their screens. Only Margaret, Richard's assistant, dared to look at me, her expression a mix of pity and warning. The walk to the elevator felt endless. Each step echoed in the silence, broadcasting my shame. Richard had orchestrated it perfectly: the late-day firing, the security escort, the ridiculous accusation. By tomorrow, the story would mutate through office gossip. $10 would become 100, then 1,000. Expense fraud would become embezzlement. Emily Carter would become a cautionary tale whispered in break rooms. As the elevator descended, I caught my reflection in the polished steel doors. The woman staring back looked hollow, defeated. But beneath the shock, something else stirred. Rage. Pure, crystalline rage. They'd fired me over $10, a sum so insignificant that Richard probably spent more on his morning latte. But that $10 would cost him everything. I didn't know how yet, but I knew this. Richard Hale had just made the most expensive mistake of his life. The security guard walked me to my car in silence. As I drove away from BrightPath for the last time, my phone buzzed with an email from HR. My access had been revoked. My final paycheck would be mailed. And I was reminded of the non-disclosure agreement I'd signed. They thought they'd silenced me. They thought they'd broken me. They thought wrong. The first week after my termination, I couldn't leave my apartment. I sat in my one-bedroom rental in Capitol Hill, watching the October rain streak down windows I hadn't cleaned in months. The walls felt like they were closing in, decorated with achievements that now mocked me. My MBA diploma, project management certification, the employee of the quarter plaque from just 3 months ago. All worthless now. My savings account held exactly $3,847. In Denver's market, that might cover 2 months of rent if I ate nothing but ramen. The credit card bills kept arriving like clockwork. The professional wardrobe I'd invested in. The certification courses I'd paid for myself. The networking dinners where I'd foolishly picked up tabs to build relationships. Every expense had been an investment in a future that Richard had stolen with a $10 lie. By the second week, the whispers started. LinkedIn connections quietly disappeared. Recruiters who'd courted me for months stopped returning calls. Sarah, who I'd considered a friend, texted me. Heard about what happened. Can't believe you'd risk everything for so little money. Please don't contact me again. The story had mutated exactly as Richard planned. On Glassdoor, anonymous reviews appeared under BrightPath's profile, praising the company for its zero-tolerance policy on theft and its swift action against dishonest employees. My name wasn't mentioned, but in Denver's tight-knit tech community, everyone knew. I applied for 17 jobs in the third week. 3 acknowledged receipt. 0 offered interviews. 1 recruiter, bolder than the rest, actually told me why. Emily, you're talented, but you're radioactive right now. Nobody wants to hire someone who stole from Richard Hale. Maybe try another city. Another city. As if I could afford to relocate with no job, no references, and a reputation in ruins. Sleep became impossible. I'd lie awake at 3 a.m., replaying every moment, wondering what I could have done differently. Should I have just signed off on the fraudulent billing? Should I have gone straight to the authorities instead of confronting Richard? The what-ifs ate at me like acid. My mother called from Nebraska, her voice careful and confused. Honey, Mrs. Patterson said she heard you were in some kind of trouble at work. Something about stealing? That can't be right. Even my mother doubted me. That hurt worse than anything. By week 4, I'd sold my good jewelry, the pearl necklace I'd bought to celebrate my first promotion, the watch I'd saved 6 months to afford. Together, they brought in $2,200 at a pawn shop where the owner looked at me with the particular mix of pity and disgust reserved for the desperate. The eviction notice arrived on a Monday. I had 30 days to pay or vacate. My landlord, who'd always been friendly, wouldn't make eye contact when I tried to explain. I'm sorry, Emily, but I need reliable tenants. You understand? I understood perfectly. Richard hadn't just taken my job. He'd poisoned my entire life. But it was on day 32, sitting on the floor of my nearly empty apartment, eating instant noodles from a pot because I'd sold my bowls, that something shifted. The despair that had been drowning me crystallized into something harder, sharper. I realized I'd been playing defense, letting Richard's narrative define me. But I had something he didn't know about, documentation of the Morrison contract fraud, saved on a personal drive he couldn't touch. That night, I opened my laptop and started researching. Not job sites this time, but Richard Hale himself, his company's financial reports, his investor relationships, his political connections. Every public record, every news article, every social media post. If he'd destroyed my life over $10, I needed to understand why. What was he so desperate to hide? The anger that had been simmering beneath my despair finally boiled over. I wasn't just another casualty of corporate greed. I was a witness he'd tried to silence. And that attempt to silence me revealed his greatest weakness. Richard Hale was scared. A man with nothing to hide doesn't destroy someone over $10. I made a decision that night, sitting in my gutted apartment with an eviction notice on my coffee table and my career in ashes. I could leave Denver, start over somewhere else, and spend years rebuilding from nothing. Or I could stay and fight, not just for revenge, but for justice. For every employee Richard had crushed. For everyone who'd been sacrificed to protect his empire of lies. The next morning, I didn't apply for a single job. Instead, I opened a new notebook and wrote 2 words at the top of the first page: Destroy Richard. Beneath it, I began to plan. The despair was still there, lurking at the edges of my consciousness. But it no longer controlled me. It fueled me. Every humiliation, every rejected application, every pitying look from former colleagues, they all became kindling for the fire that would eventually consume BrightPath Solutions. Richard thought he'd broken me with that $10 lie. He'd actually created his worst nightmare, someone with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The Denver Public Library became my war room, or free Wi-Fi, public computers that couldn't be traced to me. And best of all, access to databases most people didn't know existed. I spent 12 hours a day there, surviving on vending machine coffee and the kind of obsessive focus that only comes from having nothing left to lose. BrightPath's public filings were a masterclass in creative accounting. Revenue streams that appeared and disappeared. Subsidiary companies registered in Delaware that existed only on paper. Consulting fees paid to firms that shared addresses with empty lots. But the real goldmine came from the SEC Edgar database. Every contract with the government had to be partially disclosed, and Richard had gotten sloppy. The Morrison contract wasn't his first fraud. Over 5 years, I traced 17 government contracts totaling over $200 million. Each one showed the same pattern: initial low bid to win the contract, then systematic overcharging through modifications and necessary adjustments. The Department of Defense, the Department of Energy, even the EPA, Richard had stolen from them all. But I needed more than paper trails. I needed witnesses. I started with LinkedIn, messaging former BrightPath employees who'd left abruptly. Most ignored me. They knew I was radioactive. But eventually, Katie Morsky responded. She'd been a senior accountant who'd resigned to pursue other opportunities 3 years ago. We met at a coffee shop in Aurora, far from downtown Denver's tech scene. They offered me $90,000 to sign an enhanced NDA and disappear, she told me, hands wrapped around her coffee cup like it could protect her. I had 2 kids in college. I took it. What did you see, Katie? She laughed bitterly. What didn't I see? Double billing, ghost employees, kickbacks to procurement officers. Richard runs that place like a criminal enterprise with a tech company facade. Would you testify to that? Are you insane? Richard would destroy me. He's destroyed you, hasn't he? She was right. But she gave me 3 more names before she left. Thomas Chen had been BrightPath's CFO before Martin. Now he lived in Seattle, running a small consulting firm. Our Skype call was brief, but explosive. Richard forced me out when I questioned the Q3 reports in 2019. He said, I have documents, but my lawyer says the NDA is airtight. If I violate it, I lose my severance, my pension, everything. What if I told you I had a way to expose him without violating any NDAs? Then I'd say you're either naive or brilliant. Either way, I can't risk it. But, Emily, check the Morrison contract's subcontractors, specifically, Pinnacle Technical Services. Pinnacle Technical Services was registered to an address in Delaware, the same address as 14 other BrightPath subcontractors. The CEO was listed as Robert Harding, except Robert Harding didn't exist. The Social Security number on the corporate filing had belonged to a man who died in 1987. Richard wasn't just overcharging, he was billing the government for work performed by fake companies he controlled. This was RICO territory. Federal crime, prison time. The third former employee insisted we meet in person. Marcus Webb, former head of IT security, chose a diner in Wyoming, 2 hours from Denver. He looked like he hadn't slept in months. You're playing with fire, he said before I even sat down. Richard has connections you can't imagine. Judges, prosecutors, politicians. Why do you think he's never been audited? Because no one's ever compiled the evidence properly. Marcus laughed. You think you're the first person to try this? Jennifer Huang tried in 2018. Her car went off a mountain road. Black ice, they said, in July. David Park tried in 2020. He's in federal prison now for tax evasion that mysteriously appeared in his returns. My blood ran cold. You're saying, Richard, I'm saying nothing, but if you're smart, you'll drop this and leave Colorado. I can't. I have nothing left to lose. Marcus studied me for a long moment. Then he pulled out a flash drive. I shouldn't give you this. It's everything I backed up before Richard forced me out. Email threads, financial records, even recordings from board meetings. He doesn't know I have it. Why are you giving it to me? Because maybe someone with nothing to lose is exactly what it takes to bring him down. But Emily, you need more than evidence. You need someone with a platform. Someone Richard can't easily silence. That night, I reviewed Marcus's files in my apartment. The scope of Richard's crimes was staggering, but Marcus was right. Evidence alone wasn't enough. Richard had survived this long because he controlled the narrative. I needed someone who could change that narrative. Someone with credibility and reach. I started researching journalists who specialized in corporate fraud. Most worked for publications Richard probably had influence over. But one name kept appearing in my searches. Mark Jennings. Independent investigative journalist, Pulitzer nominee. And most importantly, someone who'd been sued by corporate giants 4 times and won every case. His latest article had exposed a pharmaceutical company's price-fixing scheme. The CEO was now serving 12 years in federal prison. I drafted my email to Mark 17 times before sending it. The subject line was simple. Bright Path Solutions. $200 million in government fraud. I have proof. Then I waited, surrounded by evidence of crimes that should have put Richard Hale in prison years ago, hoping that somewhere out there, someone still cared about justice. The $10 he'd used to destroy me had led me to evidence of millions in theft. Now I just needed someone brave enough to help me use it. Mark Jennings replied to my email after 3 days with just one line. If this is real, meet me at Union Station, Thursday, 2 p.m., come alone. I arrived 30 minutes early, my paranoia at an all-time high after Marcus's warnings. Union Station's Grand Hall bustled with travelers, the perfect place for a meeting that needed witnesses but not eavesdroppers. I spotted Mark immediately. He looked exactly like his photos, mid-40s, graying beard, wearing a leather jacket that had seen better days. He sat reading a newspaper, old school. Emily Carter, he said without looking up. The woman who got fired for stealing $10 from a company that steals millions. Ironic. You've researched me. I research everyone who emails me claiming to have evidence of massive fraud. 99% are cranks or disgruntled employees with nothing but accusations. He finally looked at me, his brown eyes sharp and calculating. So, which are you? I pulled out a folder containing just enough evidence to prove my credibility without giving everything away. Page 1 is a billing invoice for the Morrison contract. Page 2 is what was actually delivered. The difference is $8 million. Mark studied the documents for several minutes, his expression never changing. Then he set them down and leaned back. This could be fabricated. It could be. I agreed. But pages 3 through 15 show the same pattern across 12 other contracts. Page 16 is a recorded board meeting where Richard explicitly discusses hiding these overcharges. And page 17 is a list of 43 witnesses, including 6 who are willing to talk. That got his attention. 6 witnesses? With Richard Hale's reputation for destroying people? 7, if you count me. You don't count. You're the disgruntled employee. Your testimony is worthless without corroboration. His bluntness stung. But he was right. That's why I need you. Mark was quiet for a long moment, studying me. What you're suggesting would take months of investigation. I'd need to verify every document, interview every witness, trace every financial transaction. And that's assuming Richard doesn't find out and bury us both. Are you afraid of him? I'm not afraid of anyone, Mark said flatly. But I'm not stupid either. Richard Hale has resources we can't match. He has lawyers who could tie us up in court for years. He has connections that could make my life very difficult. So you're passing. I didn't say that. He pulled out a tablet and showed me a screenshot. This is from an anonymous source, sent to me 6 months ago. They claimed BrightPath was defrauding the government but provided no evidence. Then they disappeared. Their email bounced, phone disconnected, like they never existed. Jennifer Huang or David Park, I thought, but didn't say. I've been watching Brightpath ever since, Mark continued. Their numbers don't add up. Their government contracts are suspiciously profitable. And Richard Hale. He paused. Richard Hale reminds me of Elizabeth Holmes, Bernie Madoff, all the corporate criminals who thought they were untouchable, until they weren't. So you'll help? I'll investigate. There's a difference. I work alone. I verify everything independently. And I publish only what I can prove beyond any doubt. This isn't about your revenge, Emily. If the story is there, I'll tell it. If it's not, I walk away. I understand. No, I don't think you do. He leaned forward. If we do this, Richard will come after you first. You're the obvious source. He'll sue you for defamation, violation of NDAs, theft of proprietary information. He'll make your current situation look like a vacation. My current situation involves eating ramen for every meal and facing eviction. How much worse can it get? Mark actually smiled at that. Fair point, but I need complete transparency. Every document you have, every source, every piece of evidence, and I mean everything, including anything that might make you look bad. Richard's lawyers will dig up every mistake you've ever made. I thought about the performance review from 2 years ago, where I'd been criticized for being too aggressive in pursuing project goals. The time I'd had one too many drinks at the company Christmas party and told Richard exactly what I thought of his management style. Every imperfection that could be weaponized against me. You'll have everything, I promised. One more thing, Mark said. This isn't a partnership. You're a source. You don't get to control the narrative, decide what I publish, or when. You don't get to review the article before it goes live. Can you handle that? Could I handle giving up control of the story that had consumed my life? But I remembered something my grandmother used to say. Sometimes you have to let go of the wheel to reach your destination. I can handle it. Mark stood and dropped cash on the table for his coffee. I'll verify what you've given me. If it checks out, we'll meet again. Same place, same time, next Thursday. Bring everything. And Emily? He paused. Start looking for somewhere safe to stay. Once this investigation starts, Richard will know someone's digging. It won't take him long to figure out who. As he walked away, I felt a mix of relief and terror. The evidence that had been burning a hole in my hard drive finally had a chance to see daylight. But Mark was right. Once this started, there was no going back. That night, I began organizing everything: financial records, emails, recordings, witness statements. 43 gigabytes of evidence that Richard Hale had built his empire on lies and theft. The $10 accusation that had destroyed my life was about to cost him everything. But first, we had to survive long enough to expose it. Mark worked faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, he'd verified enough evidence to move forward. We met at different locations each time: a park in Wash Park, a bookstore in Littleton, always public, always careful. He taught me operational security, burner phones, encrypted communications, how to spot surveillance. Richard's getting nervous, he told me during our 4th meeting. My sources say he's hired a private investigation firm. They're looking for leaks. Meanwhile, I'd made contact with someone unexpected. Margaret, Richard's assistant. She reached out through a fake Facebook account with a simple message. I know what you're doing. I want to help. We met at a Wendy's in Aurora at midnight. Margaret looked exhausted, older than her 50 years. I've been Richard's assistant for 12 years, she said. I've scheduled the meetings, typed the memos, watched him destroy good people. I kept telling myself I needed the job, the health insurance. But when he fired you over that fabricated receipt? She shook her head. That was my breaking point. It could have been anyone's receipt, I said. It was mine. Margaret admitted. From my lunch, Richard had me modify it digitally, then plant it in your expense file. I've been sick about it ever since. She handed me a flash drive. Every email Richard sent through his private server, every meeting he didn't want on the official calendar, account numbers for the offshore holdings. He thinks I'm too stupid to understand what I was seeing. He was wrong. The information was explosive. Richard had been funneling money through shell companies in the Cayman Islands. The fake subcontractors weren't just billing the government, they were washing money for other illegal activities. This went beyond fraud into money laundering, possibly even funding illegal arms deals. Mark cross-referenced Margaret's data with what we already had. "This is it," he said. "This breaks the whole thing open, but we need to move fast. My editor at the Washington Post is interested, but they want corroboration from federal investigators." That's when I remembered something Katie had mentioned. Her cousin worked for the FBI's white-collar crime division. It was a long shot. But I was running out of time. My eviction was final in 5 days. Special Agent Diana Ross agreed to an off-the-record meeting. Mark and I presented our evidence in a hotel room near the airport, the curtains drawn, phones in the bathroom with the water running. "This is substantial," Ross said after 2 hours of review. "But you obtained some of this illegally. We can't use it directly." "You don't need to," Mark said. "Use it as a roadmap. Get warrants, subpoena records. We're giving you probable cause." Ross was quiet for a moment. "If we open an investigation, Richard will know. He has contacts everywhere. You'll be in danger." "I'm already in danger," I said. "But he doesn't know how much we have. He thinks I'm just a bitter ex-employee with no credibility." "Let him keep thinking that," Ross said. "We'll need 3 weeks to build our case. Can you stay hidden that long?" 3 weeks. I had nowhere to go, no money for a hotel. Mark must have seen my expression. "You'll stay with my family," he said. "We have a guest room. Richard won't think to look there." The next morning, I packed what little I hadn't sold and disappeared. Mark's wife, Linda, was a former prosecutor who understood the stakes. Their teenage daughters were told I was a colleague working on a sensitive story. From Mark's guest room, I watched Brightpath's world begin to crack. Mark published his first article, a small piece about irregularities in government contracting that didn't name Brightpath directly, but included enough details that industry insiders knew exactly who he meant. Richard responded predictably, issuing statements about journalistic witch hunts and baseless accusations from disgruntled former employees. But I could see the panic in his actions. 3 senior executives suddenly resigned. The company announced it was conducting an internal audit to ensure full compliance with all regulations. Margaret fed us information from inside, shredding parties, deleted servers, executives meeting with criminal defense lawyers. Richard was trying to destroy evidence, but it was too late. We had everything. Agent Ross called on day 18. "We're moving tomorrow. Federal agents will raid Brightpath at 6 a.m. We're also raiding Richard's home and freezing his assets. You should know he's hired some very expensive lawyers." "Let him," I said. "He can't lawyer his way out of 43 gigabytes of evidence." Mark prepared his exposé, ready to publish the moment the raid became public. 15,000 words detailing years of fraud, complete with documents, recordings, and witness statements. The Washington Post, New York Times, and Wall Street Journal all wanted exclusive access. Mark gave them each different angles, ensuring maximum coverage. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in Mark's guest room, watching the clock, knowing that in a few hours, Richard's empire would begin its public collapse. The $10 he'd used to destroy me had led to this moment. At 5:45 a.m., Mark knocked on my door. "It's time. Diana Ross just confirmed the raid teams are in position." I walked to the window and watched the sunrise over Denver, thinking about everyone Richard had crushed over the years. Their moment of justice had finally come. My phone, my real phone, which I'd kept turned off for weeks, suddenly had signal. I turned it on to find dozens of messages from former colleagues, reporters, even Richard's lawyer. But there was only one message that mattered. A text from Margaret sent at 5:59 a.m. "They're here. It's over." The news broke at 6:47 a.m. Breaking: FBI raids, Brightpath Solutions, headquarters in massive fraud investigation. Within minutes, every major network picked it up. Helicopter footage showed federal agents carrying boxes of documents out of the building while employees stood in the parking lot, stunned. Mark's article went live at 7 a.m. sharp. The headline was perfect. The $10 Lie: How One CEO Built an $80 million Empire on Fraud. My story, our story, exploded across the internet. Within an hour, it had 2 million views and climbing. By noon, BrightPath's stock had dropped 60%. Trading was halted twice. Investors were fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. The board of directors held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to place Richard on administrative leave, as if that would save them. Richard's response came through his lawyer at a hastily arranged press conference. He stood behind his attorney, his usually perfect appearance disheveled, his gray eyes no longer cold but desperate. They claimed it was a misunderstanding, that accounting errors had been mischaracterized, that this was a coordinated attack by a disgruntled former employee with a history of theft. That's when Mark released the recording, Margaret's master stroke. She'd recorded Richard explicitly instructing her to fabricate my expense report. His own voice, clear as day. Make it $10, small enough to be petty, large enough to justify termination. Emily needs to disappear before she becomes a problem. The press conference ended abruptly. By day 3, the dominoes were falling fast. The Department of Defense announced it was suspending all contracts with BrightPath, effectively cutting off 40% of their revenue. The SEC opened its own investigation. 3 more executives were arrested trying to board flights to non-extradition countries. Richard's wife filed for divorce and immediately froze their joint assets. His country club revoked his membership. The Denver Business Journal, which had named him Executive of the Year just 6 months earlier, ran a brutal editorial calling him the embodiment of corporate corruption. On day 5, Richard was arrested at his Cherry Hills mansion. The footage was everywhere, the mighty Richard Hale in handcuffs, doing the perp walk in his custom Italian suit. The FBI charged him with 47 counts of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Each count carried up to 20 years. But the real devastation came on day 7, when BrightPath's biggest investors filed lawsuits to recover their losses. The company's credit lines were frozen. Suppliers demanded immediate payment. Clients canceled contracts. The death spiral was swift and merciless. Margaret called me from the office. They're laying off everyone. Security is here, escorting people out. It's chaos. I felt for the innocent employees, the ones who'd just been doing their jobs. But the company was rotten from the core. It had to fall. Day 10 brought the bankruptcy filing. BrightPath Solutions, once valued at $80 million, listed assets of $12 million against liabilities of over $100 million. The company that had existed for 20 years was dead, killed by the greed of one man and the courage of those who stood up to him. The media couldn't get enough. From tech titan to federal inmate, blared fortune. The whistleblower who toppled an empire wrote The Atlantic, featuring a photo of me that Mark had taken. I looked tired but determined, no longer the hollow woman in the elevator's reflection. Katie, Marcus, and Thomas all came forward publicly. Their NDAs void now that criminal activity had been exposed. Other victims emerged, former employees, cheated contractors, government officials who'd suspected fraud but couldn't prove it. The U.S. Attorney's Office said it was the largest corporate fraud case in Colorado history. On day 14, something unexpected happened. A GoFundMe appeared. Support Emily Carter, the whistleblower who exposed BrightPath. I didn't create it. Mark's wife Linda did. Within 48 hours, it raised $127,000. Messages poured in from people who'd been crushed by corporate bullies, thanking me for standing up. Richard's trial was set for 6 months out, but his lawyers were already negotiating a plea deal. The evidence was overwhelming. Conservative estimates suggested he'd stolen over $200 million over 5 years. His personal assets, the mansion, the yacht, the art collection, were seized to pay restitution. 3 weeks after the raid, I stood outside BrightPath's headquarters. The building was dark, the logo being removed by construction workers. The marble lobby I'd once walked through with such pride was behind chains and padlocks. A bankruptcy auction notice was taped to the door. A security guard I didn't recognize was manning the entrance. "You can't go in," he said. "Building's closed." "I know," I replied. I used to work here. He looked at me more carefully. You're her, Emily Carter, the one who brought them down. Richard brought himself down. I just told the truth. Still, he said, that took guts. My daughter just graduated college, wants to work in tech. I'm going to tell her about you, about standing up to bullies, even when it costs everything. As I walked away, my phone rang. It was a recruiter from a tech company in San Francisco. Ms. Carter, we've been following your story. We believe integrity is the most important quality in an employee. We'd like to offer you a position as our Chief Compliance Officer. The salary was more than I'd ever made at BrightPath. The irony was perfect. Richard's attempt to destroy me had made me more valuable than ever. That night, Mark and I had dinner to celebrate. You know what the best part is, he said. Richard's going to federal prison over $10. Every day for the next 20 years, he'll remember that his empire fell because he was too petty to just let you go. The $10 lie had cost him everything. $80 million. His freedom, his reputation, his life as he knew it. Justice, it turned out, was priceless. 6 months later, I stood in the federal courthouse in downtown Denver, waiting to testify at Richard's sentencing. He'd pled guilty to 23 counts, hoping for leniency. His lawyers painted him as a man who'd lost his way, who'd started with good intentions but succumbed to pressure and greed. When they called my name, I walked to the witness stand, passing Richard at the defendant's table. He looked smaller somehow, his expensive suit replaced by a cheaper one, his perfect tan faded to prison pallor. For a moment, our eyes met. I expected to see hatred, maybe remorse. Instead, I saw nothing. The cold gray eyes were empty, defeated. Ms. Carter, the prosecutor began, can you describe the impact of Mr. Hale's actions on your life? I told them everything. The humiliation of being escorted out, the weeks of eating ramen, the isolation when everyone believed I was a thief, the nights I'd considered giving up entirely. But I also told them about the strength I'd found, the truth that had set me free, and the justice that had finally arrived. Mr. Hale destroyed my life over $10, I concluded. $10 he fabricated to silence me. But that $10 revealed who he really was. A man so corrupted by greed that he'd destroy anyone who threatened his empire of lies. Richard's mother sobbed in the gallery. His ex-wife sat stone-faced. Former employees filled 3 rows, all there to see the man who'd terrorized them face consequences. The judge, a stern woman named Harrison, looked at Richard. Mr. Hale, do you have anything to say? Richard stood slowly. I made mistakes. I lost sight of what mattered. I apologize to everyone I hurt, especially Ms. Carter. The words were hollow, coached, meaningless. Even his lawyer looked unconvinced. Judge Harrison wasn't moved. Mr. Hale, you didn't make mistakes. You made choices. Calculated, deliberate choices to defraud the government and destroy anyone who stood in your way. You stole millions from taxpayers. But worse, you stole the livelihoods and reputations of innocent people. For what? For money you didn't need. For power you abused. For an empire built on lies. She paused, looking directly at him. The $10 you used to frame Ms. Carter reveals everything about your character. It shows a man so petty, so cruel, that he would destroy someone's life over nothing. The sentence I impose must reflect not just the financial crimes, but the human cost of your actions. Richard Hale, I sentence you to 18 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years supervised release. You will pay full restitution to all victims, forfeiting all assets obtained through fraud. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell like thunder. Richard swayed on his feet. His lawyer steadied him as federal marshals approached with handcuffs. As they led him away, he looked back once. Not at me, but at the empty courtroom. As if seeing his life disappear into nothing. Outside the courthouse, the Denver sun felt warm on my face. Margaret was there, now working for a nonprofit that helped corporate whistleblowers. Mark was already typing on his phone, crafting his final article on the Brightpath scandal. Katie, Marcus, and Thomas had all found new jobs, their courage in coming forward making them heroes in the tech community. "How do you feel?" a reporter asked, shoving a microphone at me. "Free," I said simply. I walked to my car, a modest Honda, nothing fancy, bought with my signing bonus from the San Francisco company. As I drove past the old Brightpath building, now being converted into apartments, I thought about the journey from that October day when I was fired to this moment. Richard had tried to erase me over $10. Instead, he'd created something he never expected, a woman with nothing to lose and everything to fight for. His cruelty had become his downfall, his greed, his destruction. I pulled over at a coffee shop, ordered a $10 latte, the good kind, with extra shots and real vanilla. I sat by the window, watching Denver's business district buzz with afternoon energy. Somewhere in federal prison, Richard was learning what it meant to lose everything. His $80 million empire was gone, sold off piece by piece to pay his victims. My phone buzzed with an email from a young woman in Texas. She'd been fired by her boss after reporting sexual harassment, framed for stealing office supplies. She wanted advice on fighting back. I smiled and started typing a response. This was my life now, not just surviving Richard's attack, but helping others survive theirs. The $10 that should have destroyed me had instead revealed my purpose. Richard thought he was erasing a problem. He'd actually created a warrior. As I finished my overpriced coffee, I raised the cup slightly, a toast to justice, to truth, and to the beautiful irony that Richard Hale, who'd built an empire on calculated cruelty, had been brought down by his pettiest decision, $10. That's all it took to destroy a corrupt man who thought he was untouchable. And that's all it took for me to discover exactly how strong I really was. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever stood up to a workplace bully? Have you witnessed corporate injustice? Let's discuss in the comments. Your support means everything. And remember, sometimes the smallest injustices reveal the biggest truths.